Hello, health champions. Today we're going to talk about the top 10 healthiest foods. By the end of this video, you're going to have a brand new perspective on what healthy food is. Plus, we're going to debunk one of the big nutrition myths on the internet today. Food number 10 is romaine lettuce, and these are in no particular order. So romaine lettuce has a bunch of different minerals like calcium, magnesium, potassium, etc. It has some zinc, manganese, selenium, has a bunch of B vitamins, and it has a good bit of vitamin C and vitamin K. So when we look at the percentages, we see that the minerals are going to range in the 1 to 3% range. And the vitamins are going to be between 2 and 7. Vitamin C is about 10%. Vitamin K is about 70% of the recommended daily allowance. So you're getting a little bit of a lot of different things. And there's more things than that in there. But we want to stay away from picking one food necessarily and say that this is the best food or these are the top 10 foods. Because then we think that if it didn't make the list, then it must not be so great. And here's the thing, that you still have to eat a lot of these different servings. So if you eat 7 or 8 servings of leafy greens, you're going to get a substantial contribution to the nutrients that you need. But we don't want to exclude everything else. And that's what happens when we play favorites. So we want to keep in mind that arugula and leafy greens and kale, Swiss chard, spring mix, all of these have similar nutrients, all right? Some might be 1% higher in this or 1% lower in that, but overall they're very, very similar. So we don't want to really play favorites. Now, a lot of people love spinach and it's a part of a lot of different mixes. So this is okay for most people, but a lot of people are also sensitive to oxalates. So I put a question mark on spinach because it's one of those you want to be a little bit careful with. Another thing we want to try to get away from is to focus too much on the numbers, because what is the RDA, the recommended daily allowance? Well, it's someone's opinion or conclusion about how much nutrients we need. But here are some of the limitations. So first of all, there's a difference between a deficiency amount and the optimal amount. So if they check a nutrient and they say below this level, you get a deficiency symptom, then what amount is the optimal? We don't really know. The second thing is that they don't test these on humans because it's costly, it's complicated, and it's unethical. So most of these studies have been done on mice that they assume work the same way as humans, and then they just extrapolate the results. The third thing, and maybe the biggest, is that they always test these on synthetic nutrients, on isolated synthetic nutrients. And when we get the nutrients from food, it might be a completely different story. Number 4 is gut flora. So everyone has a different gut flora, and how healthy yours is going to determine how much of those nutrients you actually absorb and how effectively you use them. We can also have different foods interact with each other and affect how things are absorbed. We can have anti-nutrients. Some foods contain chemical compounds that prevent the body from absorbing and using nutrients. Different climates can affect how much you need. If you live in a very hot climate, you might sweat and lose a lot of minerals. If you live in a cold climate, you might need more of certain things. Also, if you're very physically active, you might need more nutrients, or if you're emotionally stressed, you might need more nutrients. Requirements can change dramatically if you have a chronic disease or a metabolic problem, and if you're on some kind of medication, that can also affect what you need and how much you absorb. So basically what I'm saying is that yes, it's important. We don't want to ignore the RNA, but we can't look at that number as a truth either. We have to understand that there are very, very broad ranges, and we don't know to what extent they apply to us. So we want to think about it a little differently, which is what we're going to talk about in this video. Number 9, again, in no particular order, is extra virgin olive oil. And if you read up a little bit on it, they're going to tell you that it can reduce inflammation, that it can protect you from heart disease, cardiovascular disease. They'll tell you it can protect the endothelium, the inside of blood vessels. You'll hear that it can reduce the bad LDL, the oxidized, damaged LDL, that it can reduce blood clotting, and that it can reduce blood pressure. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with those claims, but the question is, compared to what? And extra virgin olive oil became super popular when they figured out that people around the Mediterranean had less heart disease than a lot of other places. So now they said that, well, it's all the things that they eat there, the fish and the olive oil and the so forth. But a lot of those countries around there, like Crete, for example, they get 30 to 40% of all their calories from extra virgin olive oil, which means they don't eat any seed oil at all. They don't eat hardly any processed foods. And that's the whole point of this. Extra virgin olive oil is great simply because it's not bad. It's good because it's not garbage. So when we're comparing extra virgin olive oil to a diet like the Western American diet, where 60 to 70% of calories come from processed sugar, processed white flour, and processed seed oils, things that are toxic, inflammatory, and completely devoid of nutrition, then anything else is going to be better. So I'm not trying to downplay extra virgin olive oil. I'm just trying to get you to don't think of it as some kind of miracle. Just think of it as good food. If it comes from planet Earth and we don't destroy it, then it's a good food. And extra virgin olive oil is one of those. Eat it, put it on everything, drink it as much as you want because it's a whole good food. Number 8 is salmon. In a 6-ounce serving of wild-caught salmon, you're getting almost 3 times the daily allowance of vitamin B12. You're getting about 3/4 of the niacin and the vitamin D. And then we get to the omega-3s. They don't have an exact RDA on those, but you're getting 730 milligrams of EPA, and you're getting 1100 milligrams of DHA. So they're very concentrated sources of those absolutely vital omega-3s. EPA is for inflammation control, and DHA is a building block for your brain that influences how well the brain can signal and function. Some other great benefits is that it has 0 carbs, because a lot of people are carb intolerant. They can't handle a lot of carbs. And it's a great source of protein. You're going to get 30 grams of protein. And this kind of protein, just like in meat, it's very well absorbed and utilized. But as much as I love salmon and I like to put it on a top 10 list, we don't want to play favorites, because now we get the wrong idea about food. Now we think that other foods are not as good, while there's a wide variety of great foods. So if we compare it to sardines, for example, and we compare these numbers, we're going to see that some of them are a little bit higher and some of them are a little bit lower, but overall they're very, very similar. So just like leafy greens are pretty similar to each other, then fatty fish are also pretty similar to each other. And that's how we need to start thinking about food. Another example of a fatty fish is mackerel, which I also love. And again, you can see these numbers being very, very similar. Some are a little better, some are a little bit lower, but overall quite similar. Number 7 is macadamia nuts, one of my favorites. If you put it in a smoothie, it just turns it super, super creamy and yummy. It is very low in carbohydrate, it's high in protein and high in fat, plus it has quite a bit of vitamins and minerals. And one of the main things I want to emphasize is that it is very low on the allergy scale. Very, very few people. I've never really found anyone who's sensitive to macadamias, whereas millions of people are sensitive to Brazil nuts and peanuts and so forth. But let's compare some similar nuts. So if we start with the macadamia nut and we compare it to pecans and walnuts, they're quite similar. And if we look at the total amount of carbs, we see that they all have a total carb count of 14 grams per 100, or 14%. But then we can subtract the fiber. And the macadamia has 9 grams of fiber, the pecan has 10, and walnuts have 7. So we can subtract the fiber, and now we're left with the net carbs, the carb impact on blood sugar and so forth. So now we see macadamia has 5, pecans have 4, and walnuts have 7. So they're very low carb. They're very concentrated, very satisfying, dense foods. So these carbs are not going to have much of an impact regardless. We can nitpick and say that 4 is a lot better than 5, but it's not a huge difference. All of these are totally okay. But something we want to be aware of when it comes to nuts and seeds is something called omega-6s, because omega-3s are generally anti-inflammatory, but we want to get them primarily from fish, because once they're in seeds, they tend to get oxidized and rancid pretty quick. But nuts and seeds have a lot of omega-6s, which are generally pro-inflammatory. And when we look at that, the macadamia has 1%, 1 gram per 100 of the omega-6. The pecan has 20 times more, and the walnut has 38 times more. So again, we don't want to nitpick, but we want to understand that different seeds, different nuts can be widely different in that aspect. So we can still eat all of these, but we want to get a variety of foods. We don't want to think, oh, this is the superfood, let me just eat that. But we want to understand what they have in common and start seeing some patterns. And then we don't have to memorize all these things and all these lists that we're getting. Number 6 is cauliflower. Totally awesome food, and it is low carb. It has tons of vitamins and minerals in it. It's pretty high in vitamin C, and I like how it is inexpensive and it's available, widely available, and it's versatile. You can use it so many different ways. And it has quickly become one of the absolute top favorites of the low carb community, the keto community. And they're using it for everything. There's riced cauliflowers, there's cauliflower pizza crust. But that's another thing you have to be aware of. When something becomes popular, then there's going to be a lot of people try to mislead you and take advantage of you and trick you. So now, because somebody figured out how to make a cauliflower pizza crust, and I never really succeeded because they get kind of soggy and watery, but now they're selling all these different pizza crusts with cauliflower. But if you look at the label, the first ingredient is not cauliflower, it's wheat flour. And if you check the total carb content, you'll find that it's exactly as high as a regular pizza crust. So they're basically making a regular pizza crust. They are sprinkling some cauliflower on it and calling it a cauliflower pizza crust just because it's trendy right now. So don't fall for those things. Understand what good food and whole food is and stay away from those scammers. And as much as I love cauliflower, I'm also very fond of things like broccoli, asparagus, Brussels sprouts, bell pepper, and eggplants. They're all very similar. They're all non-starchy vegetables. They're full of nutrition and fiber. So don't pick one. Don't raise one to a superfood status at the expense of others, which is what so many people tend to do. Number 5 is sauerkraut, and I love sauerkraut, but I had to clarify something here. So they say that cabbage on its own has a good amount of vitamin C, about 30 milligrams per cup. But then they say that something miraculous happened, that the amount of vitamin C skyrocket when you ferment it and turn it into sauerkraut. Now it increases almost 20-fold, that we get enormous amounts of vitamin C and antioxidants. And then they claim to refer to an article, and they say that levels of antioxidants and vitamin C could reach as high as 695 milligrams, with raw fermented cabbage having the highest levels of vitamin C, hitting almost 700 milligrams per cup. And I'm always looking for mechanisms. So I'm curious, how does that happen? How do you make vitamin C by fermenting something? And they gave you the reference. So they referred to this article here and said that this is where they found the information. So I went and looked at that article, and I'm not too surprised, unfortunately, to find that this article had nothing to do with what they were talking about. The article was not talking about vitamin C. It was talking about antioxidant properties expressed as an equivalent of vitamin C. So they assume that vitamin C has a certain antioxidant capacity, and then they examine all the other compounds in cabbage that has antioxidant capacity, and then they express those as vitamin C equivalents, which is something completely different. And then if you read the heading here, it doesn't say fermented and it doesn't say sauerkraut, it says processed. So what they did was something different. But sure enough, they mentioned the 695 milligram, but they're very specific to say that it was vitamin C equivalents, not the vitamin C. And then they say that it wasn't the fermented, but the processing they're talking about is actually pickled cabbage, which means you typically add vinegar and salt. And then they say there's a good linear relationship between the phenolics and the antioxidant capacity, meaning basically the antioxidant capacity came from phenolics, and then they translated that into how much vitamin C or ascorbic acid would it take to get that antioxidant effect. And then at the end, they say that the relationship between the vitamin C or ascorbic acid and the antioxidant was very low. So it had basically nothing to do with the vitamin C. Now, one more thing we want to understand is that when they measure these things, they're not talking about the vitamin C complex that you get in real food, and that's what the body needs. They're talking about the antioxidant ascorbic acid, which is basically a preservative, and it's there to protect the plant, not to protect you. Because when it comes to antioxidants, you have your own intracellular production called glutathione. But there's so many different myths there, and here in this example, they managed to get every single one of them wrong. Unfortunately, as a result of their misinterpretation or their willful neglect, we now have a new truth. So now there's all these different articles. We have, in fact, 1,790 results. If we do a search and we put the 695 in quotation marks, so only results show up that has that exact phrase, we have thousands of results. And they're saying things like sauerkraut and fermented and this much, 695 milligrams of vitamin C. And the next article says the exact same. So there's thousands of these. And even a channel, a video YouTube channel with a name very similar to my own, managed to find this information and quote it as a truth. And now thousands of articles are published with a new truth that a lot of people believe, when the article that it came from didn't even mention fermented or sauerkraut. Instead, they were talking about antioxidants and fresh and pickled cabbage. So this is what happens when we try to sensationalize, when we don't understand the bigger picture about food, that the biggest part is if it came from planet Earth and we don't process it, if we don't destroy it, then it's going to be a good food. But now we nitpick and we find out these little molecules, and the more we dig into the molecules, the more we lose the big picture and we get confused, and they publish list after list after list, and they're comparing numbers and nothing makes sense anymore. So just try to focus on the big picture and understand what food is. But don't get me wrong, sauerkraut's still one of my favorites, just for different reasons. It's still low carb, it has vitamins, minerals, it provides really good probiotics, which are bacteria that can populate and keep your gut healthy. But it's not the only thing that can do that either. you can ferment lots of different vegetables and you'll still get those probiotics. It is very inexpensive. It's widely available. It's very versatile, just like cauliflower. It has a good amount of vitamin C. It does not have the 700 milligrams that they're talking about, but even 30 milligrams is a pretty good source. So if you eat a couple of 300 grams of sauerkraut, you're getting most of the vitamin C that you need. And now it's going to be the complex vitamin C your body is looking for. Number 4 is hamburger. And interestingly, the hamburger has no ham in it. But on the other hand, hot dogs also have no dogs in it, for which I'm very grateful. What we're talking about instead is ground beef. And we're not talking about the fast food hamburgers with all their chemicals and their sugary buns and their synthetic additives and dressings. We're just talking about the ground beef. And while most ground beef is going to be better than a lot of other food, if you really kind of want a healthy meal, you want to look for the grass-fed. Because if the animal lived the way it was supposed to live and ate the things it's supposed to eat, then the animal was healthy and the meat from it is also healthy. And if you eat that healthy, the grass-fed and ideally organic meat, even though I think grass-fed is even more important than organic, then you want to actually eat high fat, because the fat is not a problem. And this is a little shocking to some people because we heard so much about eating lean meat, lean chicken, lean ground beef. And they're even labeling the ground beef. They don't say 10% fat. They say 90% lean, which is just crazy to me. And it's, again, backwards. But what we need to understand is fat is okay. It's a great fuel source. And yes, we do need protein, but excess protein turns into glucose. Protein can only do two things. It can be incorporated into tissue and hormones and molecules, into structural things, or the excess will be burned for fuel. It will be converted into glucose, raise blood sugar, and be burned for fuel. So yes, protein is super important, but more isn't necessarily better. So if you eat a good amount of meat, which I recommend because it's very satisfying, not at the expense of everything else, but I think meat is a good foundation, then look for the high-fat meat. And here is, if you compare the calories from fat and protein, respectively, in different types of meat. So we'll just stick to ground beef for right now. If you buy the 7% fat, then the fat percentage, the calories from fat, is actually 43%, whereas the protein is 57%. So a little more protein, but close to 50-50. But already, when we get to 15% fat, 85% lean meat, now 64% is from fat and 36% from protein. So it's almost a 2-to-1 ratio now the other way. If we get up to 20%, now we have 73% from fat and 27%. So almost a 3-to-1 ratio. And once we get up to 30% fat, which you can find now with the Wagyu and the high-fat products, now 83% of the calories come from fat and only 17% from protein. So with this, you can eat a lot of meat, a lot of ground beef without getting excess protein. And again, you don't have to be terribly afraid of protein, but typically the fattier cuts, the fattier grinds actually taste better. They're more satisfying. They're more juicy. And a lot of people have avoided them because they heard that the lean is better, but that's not really the case. Now, one thing that you're going to find is that if you do the 7 or the 15 and you grind it up, like I often just grind it up in pieces in a frying pan and I spice it a little bit and I put it on a salad, then with the 7 or 15, you're not really going to get any leftover fat. But when you get up to 20, 25, 30, now there's going to be quite a bit of melted fat in the bottom of the pan, especially with 30, you're going to have a huge amount of fat in the bottom of the pan. And don't think of that as something bad, because we've been taught to throw that away. That is top quality tallow. This is great fat. You can save it for later. You could just kind of strain it off or filter it and save it for later. You can use it for cooking. It's very heat stable. It's great source of energy. It doesn't go rancid or bad for a long, long time. Or what I do is if I put this on a salad, then I'm going to use part of this as a dressing. I'll pour this over the leftover fat over the salad, and then I'll put a little bit of extra olive oil and some vinegar, and that's part of the dressing. And while this example is about ground beef, we don't want to exclude other kinds of meat. So other meat like steak and bison and lamb and poultry, as long as they're raised under quality conditions, then they're going to be very, very similar nutritionally. Number 3 is cod liver. And this is an interesting one. The one I find, and you can get this online because it's hard to find in the stores, is cod liver in its own cod liver oil. So it's the same stuff that you buy as an expensive supplement as cod liver oil liquid. This actually packed the cod liver in the can. So a can is about 4 ounces, 115 grams. And with this, you're getting some very, very packed nutrition. Now, a lot of people, they're going to hear the word liver and they're going to be hugely turned off. And then they're going to hear cod liver and they're going to associate it with something rancid that they might be forced to take when they were kids. But understand that if you buy the right kind, and just look at some of the reviews online, this is almost completely neutral in flavor. You can't really taste any fishiness at all. And it's going to be super packed with nutrients. So when we're talking about these EPAs, the omega-3s, the EPA and the DHA, there's so much in there that we don't even measure it in milligrams. We measure grams now. So 5.8 grams of EPA and 9.2 grams of DHA. These are enormous amounts, and you're going to get several days worth in one can. And the same thing holds true for vitamin A and vitamin D. You're getting 73,000 IUs and 8,400 IUs. This is basically a week's worth of vitamin A and vitamin D. And therefore, you want to be a little careful with this because you can eat too much. You don't want to eat this every day. Another thing to keep in mind is that one can of only 115 grams is going to have 84 grams of fat in it, which again, it's not a bad thing because of the fat, because it's super nutritious. However, if you have trouble digesting fat, if you have a weak gallbladder, then that might be a little too much in one sitting. So it is delicate and flavor neutral enough that you can eat it straight out of the can. But what I would recommend is put it on a salad and use the oil as a dressing, and then just spice it up, use salt, pepper, vinegar, whatever you like. And it's going to be just like salad dressing, basically. You probably won't even notice the cod liver on there, but you're going to get a massive amount of omega-3s and vitamin A and D. But because there's so much vitamin A and D, you probably just want to eat one of these cans a week. If you ate more than one a week, you could develop a toxicity in vitamin A and D. It takes a while to get there, so it wouldn't happen if you just ate it a few weeks in a row. But if you kept eating it month after month, more than one a week, then that'd be something to be concerned with. Another thing to keep in mind is that unless you just really love that fishy smell, you don't want to save this. Once you open the can, then you eat it the same day or maybe the next, because already 2 days later, even if you keep it in the fridge, it's going to be very fishy. And the reason for that is that it is so high, it's so super concentrated in these EPA and DHA, and those are extremely highly reactive. They oxidize, they go rancid so easy. And that is why they're so beneficial. They have certain properties where they're very reactive They're very highly unsaturated. So that's good for your nervous system and brain, but they can't be stored. Number 2 is eggs. And while I said that we don't want to count percentages and get too focused in on it, this is one example where one single food item, so this is for a single egg, if you ate 3, 4, 5 eggs, you're going to get a significant amount or all of these nutrients that you're going to need in a day. And that's very, very rare to get that wide a variety. So it's a very complete food. And if you use this as a base for your food, then you're going to get a lot of nutrients in just one food product. But again, you need a variety, so don't think that you're just going to eat one thing and that's the best. But if you eat eggs, then realize that quality matters. It matters with everything that you get, but especially eggs, because some chickens, some hens are mistreated and misfed so badly. They're fed hormones, they're kept in terrible conditions. And a healthy chicken is going to lay a healthy eggs. They're going to have much higher nutrients. Plus, of course, you don't want to contribute to the mistreatment of chickens. So what you're looking for, my preference, is pasture raised. That means the chickens actually had a certain area per chicken and they actually went outside to find some natural things to eat, like bugs and grass and things the chicken would look for on its own. So most of the other classifications like cage-free, they don't really mean anything. They don't mean that the chicken ever really saw the outside. And also realize that pasture raised is not the same thing as pasteurized. Pasteurized simply means they immerse them in a hot water bath very quickly to kill off some bacteria. But if you get the healthy eggs from pasture-raised chicken, then that is not really going to be an issue. Number 1 is avocado. It's a huge favorite with so many people. It doesn't matter if you're omnivore or vegan or vegetarian or low carb. They tend to all love avocado. It's rich and creamy and satisfying. It is, however, pretty low in protein, only 2 grams per 100. So if you're vegan, you need to look for your protein elsewhere. But like I said, low carb people love it because the net carbs are only 2 grams per 100. Even though it does have some total carbs, the fiber is subtracted and the fiber is substantial, 7 grams per 100 and only 2 grams of net carbs. So the fiber can also help to feed the gut bacteria and contribute to a healthy flora. And the high fat is one of the reasons it's so popular at 15 grams of fat per 100. Quite unusual for a plant. If you enjoyed this video, you're going to love that one. And if you truly want to master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell, and turn on all the notifications so you never miss a life-saving video.